Boker tov lekulam. Good morning, everyone. Welcome at 9 o'clock to the first session of the second day. It's an important day because yesterday you had dinner and we were supposed to go to election, and today, celebrating Nissim's conference, we organized the cancellation of the election. As we say in Hebrew, it's a nightmare for political scientists that they give a forecast and it doesn't work the day after. But that's politics, and we're here to celebrate the 60 years of Japan-Israeli relation. Okay, we'll start with a professor. Each panelist has about 20 minutes, and it's a busy day, so let's move on. We'll start with Professor Ehud Harari, Emeritus Political Science and East Asian Studies at the Hebrew University. He got a PhD in Berkeley University. He was a visiting professor and a researcher in universities and research institute in Japan, the US, Europe, Canada, and even South Korea. He's an author of a recently published book, which I should say a textbook, an important textbook, Japan and Maturing Democracy. From my own perspective, which is more important, is he was my PhD advisor. So Ehud will talk about, Ehud will talk about lessons from East Asia for the Middle East peace process. I wish him good luck, because I don't know, the new government might bring peace, but 20 minutes.
Good morning, everybody. Many thanks to Nissim and Shalmit and the students, volunteers who brought this conference to fruition. One of the greatest achievements of the Hebrew University. So fantastic. Thank you very much. Now, I think at least some of you raised your eyebrows reading the title of this lecture, Lessons from East Asia for the Middle East Peace Process. You must be kidding. Well, what peace process? The peace process with the Palestinians has been off the track for quite a while, and the Middle East seems to be on the verge of a major conflagration. Well, maybe the timing is not so good for discussing this issue. And Japan and Israel, or the Middle East and East Asia, two different things altogether, like comparing apples and oranges. Well, it's a futile and far-fetched subject to begin with. So, but it seems to me that the exercise is worthwhile and should be undertaken, because lessons might be drawn from failures, not only from successes. And also, by now, the issue of Japanese and Israeli uniqueness has been proven to be a red herring. And if you needed a very convincing example, you should have attended the lecture by the keynote speaker yesterday to realize that that is the case. Now, indeed, the peace process with the Palestinians has yet to get back on track. But the peace with Egypt and Jordan, albeit cold, holds, and what might be called an unofficial peace with other Arab states in the Gulf and North Africa has been in existence for several years. Now, of course, doubts as to how long the cold peace would hold in view of the so-called Arab Spring in Egypt and apprehensions about the Arab Spring expanding to Jordan shouldn't be overlooked. Now, Japan and Israel are different in many ways, and as are the Middle East and East Asia. I could spend the whole 20 minutes allocated to me enumerating the differences. But recent studies have shown that despite the differences, these states and regions are comparable. It is not coincidental, by the way, that some of the notable authors of the spate of books and articles on the transitions to peace and related themes have been Israeli scholars, or so-called diaspora Israeli scholars. For example, in alphabetical order, Immanuel Adler, Yaakov Bar Simantov, Ari Katzovich, Benny Miller, Galia Press Bar Natan, and Ethel Solinger. Now, the issue of transition to peace is an existential one for us, and it is natural for us to seek and create knowledge in this respect and try to draw some realistic lessons from this intellectual exercise. Now, in the late 1990s, when the peace process with the Palestinians still had seemed to be on track, I took up the issue of comparing Japanese and Israeli efforts to establish peaceful relations with their respective former enemies and reached some tentative conclusions. More recently, Galia Press Bar Natan from the International Relations Department has published an excellent theoretically oriented in-depth study titled The Political Economy of Transitions to Peace, in which she compares transitions to peace in the Middle East, Europe, and East Asia, and in East Asia, Japan, and its East Asian neighbors. She should have been here today giving this lecture rather than me, but she is not here because she's attending another conference abroad. So I'll try to do my best. Don't shoot the pianist, he's doing his best. Now, what follows is based on my earlier analysis, Galia's book, and of recent observation of recent development. I present some of the dimensions of factors affecting positively or negatively the incentives for former enemies to transition from enmity to cold peace and from cold peace to what is known as normal peace. Scholars have distinguished among cold peace, normal peace, and security communities, or warm peace, or intimacy. So we are not talking about intimacy, we are not talking about warm peace. At least we need some cold peace and maybe normal peace to talk about realistically. So let me enumerate in an outline form the dimensions. And starting from political security dimensions. Well, both Japan and Israel have had what is known as legitimacy deficits. Japan has been able to overcome the legitimacy deficits to a very large extent over the years. Israel has been able to overcome that with respect to some Arab countries, but not with others, and especially not with some forces within the Palestinian camp. And I'm talking about, first of all, legitimacy as an independent state, but also as a leading participant in regional projects, regional economic, political, and security projects. Another dimension is, of course, the territorial disputes. Are they major, like with us, Israel and the Palestinians, or in the case of Japan, which are the disputes are over territories, but they are not major ones that could actually disrupt the process of cold peace and normal peace. Then, very important dimension is the regime type. Are we talking about liberal democracy on the one hand? Are we talking about what I might call pseudo-democracy or military regimes, and of course autocratic regimes? It makes a great deal of difference to the prospects for transitions to peace. Of course, the more a country is liberal democratic, the prospects for transition of peace are better, and they are even better when it comes not only to cold peace, but also to normal peace. I'll get back to this issue in a minute, because I think it's a very important issue that Galia has made in her book. Now, another dimension, which is very important both in the case of the Middle East, Israel, Arab relations, and Japan and its neighbors, is what is known as third-party involvement. And we are talking, of course, about the United States. Within this rubric of political security dimension, the role of third power involvement would be to compensate for military power discrepancies between the states in question. In Japan, for example, it has been said that the American bases and the presence of American forces in East Asia is like the cork in a bottle. Okay? keeping Japanese military in its place and reassuring its neighbors that Japan does not have any aggressive intentions. In Israel, of course, sometimes limiting its expansion, especially in the case of the war with Egypt. That's a most obvious example. Now, going forward to the economic dimensions. So, probably the most important one is the economic power disparity. Yeah? There has been a great deal of disparity between the economic power of Japan and its neighbors, a great deal of disparity between the economic power of Israel and its neighbors, albeit some of them are oil-producing countries. But when we look at the economies, of course, Israel's economy is the largest in the Middle East and most important one. Some of the factors with respect to this dimension is, for example, globalization, a degree of globalizing of the former enemies' economies, right? And this is related with the next dimension, which is the winners and losers. Well, when we have a peace process, it happens that some are winning from this process. They are getting benefits from this process, while others are not. They feel that they are left behind. And this discrepancy between the sense of winning and losing is very important in the process of transition to peace. Now, again, we come under this, within this framework, we get back to the third-party involvement. And third-party involvement is not only in the political and security dimension, but it's also very important in the economic dimension, because the third power offers various incentives for both sides, sometimes one side in return from political concessions to the other. So third-party involvement in the economic sphere is very important, and how this involvement takes place is very important. Now, next dimension I call style of political or economic diplomacy. Diplomacy can be assertive or what I call obliging. Diplomacy can express over-anxiousness to play center stage, to be a leading factor in the region. But at the same time, it could also adopt a less assertive role, what is known in the literature as leading from behind. So in other words, you are leading, but you are keeping yourself backstage and let some others do the work for you, so you don't actually appear as if you are so anxious to lead. Another dimension or another factors is the question of victim mentality. Victim mentality is characteristics, I would argue, both of Israel and of Japan, and it expresses itself in various ways. And this is something that also has to be taken into account when we analyze transitions to peace. Now, another dimension is the difference between, and it's probably related to the assertive or obliging type of leadership, and that is sensitivity and arrogance. Yeah, you've got, well, this is self-evident, but you have to be sensitive to the feelings of your counterpart, your former enemy. And you have to be very careful, even if your intentions are very good. And I'll give you an example of the case of Japan. Japan, of course, has expanded its economic activities throughout Asia. And Japan extended aid and established enterprises throughout Asia and so on and so forth. But it had been criticized for actually not transferring advanced technology to other countries. In other words, it just serves its own interests. So Japan came up with an assertion which was made in the pre-war era by a scholar called Akamatsu Kaname, that's right. And he presented the analogy of the flying geese formation. Geese, as you know, fly in a certain formation. You have one at the head of the formation, and then everything else moves. Everyone moves ahead, but the one at the head of the formation remains all the time at the head of the formation. And this didn't sit very well with the other countries, especially, for example, Communist China, because they felt that, well, they would rather fly in a row formation and not in a flying geese formation. Another aspect, another factor is soft power. And soft power, actually, I would divide it very roughly into two elements. One is being a model for the other countries. And as Professor Garan mentioned yesterday in his lecture, Japan has been a model of economic development, the developmental state. Now, Israel could have been a model, not now, but in its earlier years, of a developmental state strategy. But Israel could be, and there are signs that Israel actually, at least as far as part of the Palestinians, actually see Israel as the model of democracy. And this is something that actually could be helpful in improving relations between Israel and its neighbors. And another aspect of soft power is, of course, the popular culture, which Nissim is a leading world scholar about. Nissim and Dalia and Miki Daliot Bull, these are the two leading scholars of that particular issue. Popular culture could change people's mind to some extent, at least. Now, I have only 5 minutes left, maybe 4. So let me just try to give you some lessons. And you'll realize very, very fast that they are all self-evident. I mean, there's nothing bombastic about what I'm going to say next. For example, learn from mistakes. You have to learn from mistakes and don't repeat them. Right? This is self-evident. But you can see it, for example, both in the case of Japan and in the case of Israel. Yes? And it is related, for example, to the issue of the type of leadership that you want to express. Yes? Japan, for example, early on in the post-war era, tried to come up with the idea of Asia Development Fund, right? Together with the United States. I don't have the time to go into it, but Professor Hoshiro, I think, has a lot to say about that. But the idea was that actually the time was not good, and the way Japan presented itself as a leading element within the area didn't sit well with the other countries. But, for example, they learned from that mistake, I think, to some extent, because in 1966, Japan played a very important role in the establishment of the Asia Development Bank. Yeah, at the time, they did it more subtly. The person who was in charge had a lot of experience, diplomatic experience, and Japan was willing to make concessions and, for example, to agree that the headquarters of the Asia Development Bank would not be in Tokyo. You would have expected that Japan to insist on that, but it's not. It's in Manila, and it's still in Manila in the Philippines. So they learned from experience. But then later on, or very shortly after that, they came up with another idea of PAFTA, Pacific Area Free Trade, Pacific whatever. But anyway, again, this is something that was not actually conducive to make sure that the other countries would take it. The style, the leadership style, was not right. So Japan learned from experience, and it actually took a took a form in the formation of the APEC, Asia-Pacific Economic Council, and ARF, Asia Regional Forum. And also you can add that to the ASEAN +3, the Asian Association of Southeast Asian Nations +3, China, Korea, and Japan, South Korea and Japan, where Japan has played a minor role and actually pushed Australia, for example, to a certain stage, and not giving the impression that Japan was so anxious to lead. And well, there are arguments about the success of these types of institutions, but it seems at least the ASEAN +3 seems to be working very well. Yeah, it's very important to aid the former enemy in its transition to democracy and its transition to economic development. But for cold peace, it's not essential. As we saw in the case of Japan and in the case of Israel and Egypt, you can also sign a peace treaty with an authoritarian regime. But if you want to move from the cold peace to normal peace, you have to make sure that the other side opens its market, opens its regime type, becomes more participatory. Why? Because that allows more people to feel that they are winning. See, in the cold peace, who wins? The elites usually are winning. But when it comes to the other parts of society, they don't. And of course, they are very disappointed. And so normal peace cannot be achieved. Again, self-evident, be subtle in your leadership type, lead from behind. And also, I think most importantly, is that don't expect the economic and soft power incentives that they would solve deeply controversial political issues. You have to actually face the political issues and try to solve them. And maybe the change in Israeli government last night is a good news, but it's 50-50. Maybe it's a bad news. We might be on the verge of a conflagration, as I said, but at the same time, maybe it's a good sign that maybe the peace process might get back on track. Okay. Thank you for your patience.
Well, changing government helps to test theories in political science. If it doesn't work, who cares? We have another case study. Our next speaker is Hiroyuki Hoshiro. He got his PhD from Tokyo University in 2007. He's associate professor of international relations at the Institute of Social Sciences at the University of Tokyo. His recent research interests are Japan's foreign policy towards Asia-Pacific countries, especially focusing on economic regionalism. His recent publications include Co-Prosperity Sphere, again, the United States foreign policy and Japan's first regionalism in the 50s, the Pacific Affairs 2009, History and Theory of International Relations, Is Integration Possible? Well, sometimes it's possible, sometimes it's not. Social Science, Japan 2011. From summer 2008 till winter 2010, he works as a visiting fellow at the East Asia program at Cornell University. His current projects include studies of the relation between economic regionalization and political regionalism in East Asia. He will talk about Japan's role in regional community building in Asia, lessons from the past. Yes.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Hiroyuki Hoshiro. I'm an associate professor at the Institute of Social Science, Tokyo University. Well, first of all, I would like to thank Nissim-san for inviting me. As a young scholar, I'm really honored to be involved in this wonderful and exciting symposium. Today I'd like to talk about history of Japan's regionalism, especially in the 1950s and 60s. The title is Japan's Role in Regional Community Building in Asia, Lessons from the Past. Well, actually, to be honest, I'm not sure whether Japan's past can be a lesson for your country, Israel, for your region as a whole. You know, there's Japan in Asia and Israel in Middle East is quite different, as he said. There's no simple, comparison is possible. Like different history, different situation, current situation. But I'll be happy if you learn something about Japan's experience and to consider for the future. Okay. This is the outline of my presentation. I will talk about definition of regionalism, and then I will explain Japan's first regionalism, all of which failed, actually. And then I will explain why Japan's effort never bore fruit, and then explain one of the factors for Japan to advance into market in Southeast Asia. And then briefly conclusion. Okay, what is regionalism? Anyway, regionalism here refers to political will to create a formal arrangement among a certain among states on a certain geographically restricted basis. This is different from regionalization, which means increase in economic interdependence in a specific region. Okay, so regionalism. The result of regionalism is, for example, APEC, NAFTA, EU. Widespreading after 1990s. This is called new regionalism. New regionalism or second regionalism, and that means there was first regionalism. Actually, it did in the 50s and 60s, but those first regionalism never came to fruition, except the EEC and ASEAN founded in 1967. And the most eagerly, the most country that eagerly created to regional institution was Japan, actually. So I'll talk about Japan's policies. During World War II, or before World War II, Japan tried to create a kind of bloc, Asian bloc, to antithesis to the West. It's so-called Great East Asian Prosperity Sphere in Japanese, Daitowa Kyoeiken. And it failed, of course, with Japan's defeat. But even immediately after the war, post-World War II, Japan again sought to recreate regional arrangement for economic cooperation. Okay. Just before going, I just let you know that the location of Asia, just in case you might not know where the Asia is. This is Japan, Far East, okay? And this is called Northeast Asia, including mainland China, two Koreas, and Taiwan may be included. And this is called Southeast Asia. ASEAN 10 countries. And this is called South Asia, like India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka. And the three regions together are called Asia for the Japanese government at that time. Okay, so what was Japan's first regionalism? In 1955, Japan first time tried to create regional institutions, including those countries. But twice, but they were not materialized, it failed. And again, in 1956, 3 times Japan made an effort, but they were not materialized either. And in 1957, again, next year, same thing happened. But as you may guess, failed, not materialized. Okay? And 10 years later, 1966, he might mention that this process. Actually, it was materialized, called, the institution's name is Ministerial Conference for the Economic Development of Southeast Asia. But it disappeared soon after, like it lasted 7 years and disappeared. So, someone might wonder, what were Japanese motivations for Japanese government to create such kind of economic institutions? So first of all, the aim was to create financial assistance institutions, not trade liberalization arrangement. The Japanese government have never tried to create trade liberalization arrangement like free trade area, preferential trade area like TPP, due to the opposition from the agriculture sector, which has been a traditional supporter for the governmental party, LDP, Liberal Democratic Party, Jiminto. Okay? And second, the United States, Japan's allied nation, was assumed to be the largest financial contributor. There was no money for Japan at that time, so U.S. was one of candidates. And third, but Japanese policymakers thought that U.S. shouldn't take a political lead because the United States is not part of Asia. Japan is part of Asia, and as well as part of development countries. So Japanese policymakers thought that they could be a kind of mediator, bridge between the East and West, between the developed countries and developing countries. That's a basic idea for the Japanese government. Well, this is sounds like a stupid idea, actually, even crazy idea. So they didn't think about the preferences of other nations, such as the United States and the Asian countries. Now, of course, as a corollary, it failed. These are reasons for failure. First of all, the United States did not want to contribute money, of course, because without any conditions, And second, newly independent Asian countries didn't want to cooperate regionally. They were focusing on their own nation buildings. They are concentrating on their own economic implementation. Okay, so there was no space for those countries to cooperate regionally. And third, animosity, war damage towards Japan still remains strong at that time, especially for the Philippines. And fourth, the region was and still is widely diverse. Like India, conflict between India and Pakistan existed, and Malaysia and Indonesia was almost waging a war in 1965, and there was a lot of territorial dispute in Southeast Asian countries. So again, there's no space for cooperate regionally at this era. Okay, but economic interdependence between Japan and those nations was very strong at that time, actually. Then how did Japan advance into market in Southeast Asia? Part of factors was war reparation. Okay. the Philippines, the largest amount of reparation, and Burma, now Myanmar, the second largest, and Laos, the smallest. This figure shows the relations between the amount of war reparations and the amount of Japanese export towards those countries, averaged in the 1960s. Like Philippines, the top, and Indonesia, South Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos. This is, and the line is a fitted line. This is just a simple regression and very small sample, but statistically significant. And R square 0.48 means it can explain the half of the variation. It's a very powerful explanation, I think. So by giving a war reparation, economic interdependence between Japan and Southeast Asian countries has been strengthened. And then Japanese companies went into those nations and sold a lot of capital products and goods. Okay? Then economic interdependence has been strengthened more and more. And war reparation became so-called official aid, foreign ODA, official development aid, okay, yeah, in the 1970s. And in the 1980s, it became foreign direct investment, FDI, okay? Oh, very quick. Okay, let me just summarize my presentation. First, Japan's first regionalism in the 1950s all failed. There's no space for economic cooperation in Asia, including Southeast Asia and South Asia and Northeast Asia. These were lessons for Japanese government, and the Japanese government never made an effort to create same kind of institutions until 1990s. And there's no regionalism until the 1990s. And third, war reparations were a driving force for Japan to go into market in Asia. And then, the process was going until now, okay? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I apologize. I should have been more socialist, as my Professor Harari said. I'd like to thank the students that are helping this, organizing this conference. They were here from 6 o'clock in the morning, some of them. So, as we say in other languages, Chaleo, good job. Thanks. Our third speaker is Dr. Nissim Otmazgin, who is the co-organizer of this wonderful conference. He's a lecturer in the Department of East Asian Studies at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and a research fellow at the Harry S. Truman Research Institute for Advanced of Peace. So they say we're focusing on peace, trying to get peace. After we achieve peace, we'll have to cancel all these organizations. That is why it will take a few more decades. His research interests include Japan-Southeast Asian relations, culture, industry, and culture policy in Japan and South Korea, and popular culture and regionalization in East and Southeast Asia. He is the author of Regionalizing Culture, the political economy, the political economy of Japanese popular culture in East Asia, forthcoming in Y University Press, excellent, and co-author together with Professor Eyal Ben-Ari, Popular Culture and the State in East and Southeast Asia, sorry, at Routledge, 2011, and popular culture and co-production and collaboration in East and Southeast Asia at the National University of Singapore Press in 2012. That's brand new. He has published a number of articles in leading international journals, including Media, Culture and Society, and International Relations of the Asia Pacific Review, and Contemporary Southeast Asia. It's a long list. We are honored. Dr. Nissim Otmazgin will speak about geopolitics and soft power, Japan's cultural policy and cultural diplomacy in Southeast Asia. Nissim, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Ilan, for this kind introduction. Just put on my PowerPoint presentation. Is this? Okay. Okay, good morning everyone, and thank you for coming such an early morning. I will start with the conference I was invited to last year. Last year, the Japanese government launched a new, yet another campaign called Cool Japan. Designed to make better use of Japan's cultural resources as a part of its diplomatic and perhaps economic contact. I was invited to this, one of the trajectories of this event in Singapore to talk about Japan's popular culture exports and the ways the Japanese government can use it or maybe brand it to help actually Japan as a whole. This attitude, and this is only one of several initiatives in the field that the Japanese is trying to actually make use or actually connect to Japan's successful popular culture export. And this attitude is being driven by the success of the private sector in exporting pop culture. As we know, and many books were written on this topic, and many conferences were organized on this topic, including one that I organized. Japan's popular culture abroad is very successful. And sometimes the Japanese are very surprised to see how successful it is abroad. I attended a kind of anime convention in the United States in Baltimore last summer when no less than 100,000 people participated, most of them dressed in cosplay, in a costume play. And I met some of the Japanese producers and voice actors who were invited to this event, and they couldn't speak English. And I spoke with them in Japanese, and they were all very surprised. They said, when we do our work in Japan, we never think that there is such a big market abroad. We never think that actually our products can be so global. So some of them said, look, maybe perhaps we should think about going abroad a little bit or actually having a global view. No doubt, if those were American companies, they would already occupy the global market. So actually the Japanese companies' contact is still very much inward looking. Now, I would like to start with this phenomena. When we talk about Japanese popular culture, there is a wide variety of products and fields. Here I try to make some kind of list that depict what we talk about. When we talk about popular culture, music, television programs, of course, anime and manga is actually a key feature in this. And since I would like to talk about a little bit about pop culture, I chose to start with a few pictures I took during my traveling in Asia. This is, for example, in Hong Kong or even Singapore, when you see a big section of Japanese pop music. Of course, Japanese fashion journals, which are in Japanese or translated into the local languages. Japanese journals are a major engine, I would say, in spreading this word about contemporary Japanese culture. And of course, anime, video games, both pirated or not pirated. Some would include Japanese food, Japanese cuisine, as a part of the success of Japan's popular culture. And of course, animated characters, right? This was taken in Shanghai, this picture depicting Mao Zedong next to another famous character, Doraemon, you might have heard of. So basically, actually, you see all these products and all these images, and this is what fascinated me when I went to travel in Asia. I come from a political science background, but I wanted to connect my field into this field of popular culture. And one point to emphasize is that there is a greater variety and intensity of Japanese popular culture only in Asian markets, especially in big cities. Although you can find it in other parts of the world, including the United States, I would say there is a special concentration, special salience only in the cultural geography of East and Southeast Asia. And this is one of the reasons that drives, I would say, governmental or institutional initiatives to try to research and try to make use of this popularity. Now, the acceptance of Japan's popular culture in Asia is especially noteworthy given Japan's imperialistic past. In spite of the suffering that Japan inflicted on its neighbors during the wars, long wars of war and colonization, and its attempt to use culture as a means of control in its colonies, young people in East and Southeast Asia, they don't care much about this. They continue to consume Japanese culture. They don't make any connection. For us, for historians, we immediately make this connection. But for young people, it is not a factor in their liking or not liking of Japan. Maybe some of them, you know, they don't really forget completely about Japan's imperialistic past. But they continue to buy animation in their tens of millions, watch Japanese-made television programs, and listen to Japanese music. Now, interestingly, it was only until recently that the Japanese government started to seriously acknowledge the economic and diplomatic advantages of pop culture. In fact, during most of the post-war period, the Japanese government did very little to promote the export of culture, especially to Asia. First, because it was regarded as a dangerous thing, as a potential to explode, to create grievances from the time of the war. But I would say basically, the government didn't think that popular culture is a product or field worth investing in. What is popular culture? It's nonsense, right? It's not important. It's not like traditional cultures, right? Like kabuki or other things. So popular culture actually was not considered as a serious thing to invest. I should say one episode that demonstrates it. When I was doing some research about, I tried to look at the export of Japanese music to Asian countries. So I went to the Bureau of Japanese Custom to try to ask them for figures. Please tell me how much popular culture products were exported during the 70s and 80s. And apparently until 1985, the Bureau took record of the export of Japanese music in kilograms. How many kilograms of music were exported every year? Because they didn't think that music has some kind of commercial values, right? So how many containers of music were sent to Asian countries? Only in 1985, they started to value it in numbers, in money, right? I think it's very indicative of the change in the attitude. However, as you might know, following the success of Japan, of the private sector, and the enthusiastic acceptance of Japan's popular culture by the youth throughout Asia, the Japanese government has become increasingly interested in this sector, because both it can help diplomacy and it can help economy. Now, I should say from the beginning, I'm very supportive of this. I think this is a very positive phenomenon. And you often hear these words like, catchy phrases like soft power to indicate the potential of Japan's popular culture export, or as they say in Japanese, soft power. Yeah, you hear this word again and again in public discourse in Japan. Now, in this paper, rather than looking in this recent popular culture explosion of popularity in East and Southeast Asia and its political and economic meaning, I did it in other papers and books. I would like to cast a wider historical view to look at the Japanese government attitude towards the export of culture. And I would like to look at it in a 100-year perspective. Meaning, I would be looking at 3 major periods. Of course, you can divide it into sub-periods, but I think these periods are helpful for understanding the changing attitudes towards the world, the role of culture in the political life of the state. First, before and throughout the war, where culture was basically used as a tool of colonization. Here, this supports, the government saw it as a part of cultivating support and convincing the local people to accept Japanese hegemony. The second period is a period of long avoidance. Here, after the war, the Japanese government became very much uninterested in promoting Japanese culture in Asia due to fears of being accused of once again engaged in so-called cultural imperialism. You can see very little initiatives. And the third period is, of course, in the 90s, most recently, where popular culture is acknowledged both as a diplomatic and commercial, for its diplomatic and commercial advantage. Now, I plan to show that Japan's culture policy during its empire building was designed to help integrate the colonies under the so-called Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere that was mentioned before by Hoshiro-san. But it's changed immediately after its defeat and become inward-looking and cautious due to the attempts to reposition Japan's position as a non-military power primarily concerned with its economy. And the culture policy changed again in the 90s following the emergence of Japan as a cultural power, known not only as an industrial and consumer of products, but also as for its innovative contemporary culture and lifestyle. And I should say something. Most of the students here at the Department of East Asian Studies came to study about Japan because they were interested. They saw popular culture before. Now, we teach them history, politics, culture, society, but I would say the trigger was popular culture. So popular culture in this sense is very important. Now, the question is, culture policy. Why do states have culture policy? And this is a kind of the usual definition of what culture policy is, a wide range of governmental initiatives, programs, and discourses designed to promote the country's culture, tradition, language, of art. Now, culture policy many times refers to governmental policy within the country, but more recently, some researchers have applied it for outside countries as well. Now, similar to propaganda, culture policy is a politically motivated set of initiatives and actions designed to influence the mass opinion by appealing to the emotions rather than rational. However, unlike propaganda, culture policy includes a much broader set of activities and fields which rather work implicitly on the long term. Other related words you might hear is cultural diplomacy or public diplomacy. These are basically the application of culture policy as a part of diplomacy. Well, there are many other names. For example, you can hear sometimes soft power, of course, and brand state. I don't have so much time to talk about these terms. If there'll be questions, I'll be happy to talk about them. Now, let's go directly to the first period. At the very basic, cultural policy or cultural diplomacy was seen back then, I'm talking about the 30s, 20s and 30s Japan, as a new sophisticated strategy to influence other countries by culture. By the way, it's not of course, it's not a Japanese development. It was developed by, after the First World War by a few European countries that they thought about using culture as a part of their diplomacy. This was a completely new idea. Japan, as a diligent learner from the West at that time, as we heard yesterday in Professor Sheldon's lecture, also thought about using bunka gaiko, right, cultural diplomacy, as a part of its international conduct with Western countries. There are a few interesting quotations here saying that you use bunka gaiko, cultural diplomacy, towards advanced states, meaning in Europe. While in Asia, the terminology was bunka seiji, or bunka seisaku, cultural policy. Now, before its defeat in the war, Japan's colonial and wartime intrusions into East Asia included the introduction and sometimes the imposition of culture on the expense of local culture. After Japan occupied and colonized Taiwan and Korea and launched its conquests into Manchuria and China, culture was increasingly seen as a way to diffuse resentment and support local elites who were sympathetic to Japan. In the colonies of Taiwan and Korea, and in some areas of China, cultural and educational policies were not only designed to achieve better control, but also to facilitate their assimilation with Japan. Culture policies then rested on the notion that it was essential to use other aspects of control aside from militaristic coercion to transform the colony's inhabitants' mental and spiritual outlook and make them accept Japan. An important part to reinforce the integration of the colonies with Japan was through the language. Japanese authorities in Taiwan, Korea, and Manchukuo insisted on making Japanese the national language, to use by officials and later by common people. In China, Japan's cultural policies included sponsoring Japanese-related events and providing patronage for Chinese students. In the 20s and 30s, the China Cultural Affairs Bureau, together with the Foreign Ministry, supported various Sino-Japanese association and students' exchange programs. About 6,000 Chinese students were sent to study in Japan, usually with scholarship, with the intentions of cultivating local elite sympathetic to Japan. Now, some Japanese individuals also helped disseminate Japanese culture, believing it was the right way to save China from the West's exploitative control. Actually, some of these people, and there are many documented cases, they really believed that they have some kind of cultural mission, right? Cultural mission to help Asia from the West, to help China from the West. Some of them were really interested in Chinese learning. Right? So actually, they thought that if they will go to China and disseminate some of the Japanese ideas, they will help the local people. However, the government had a completely different attitude, and usually their efforts were co-opted by the government. Now, in Southeast Asia, the implementations of Japan's cultural policies were less organized. They were mainly ad hoc initiatives introduced on the eve of invasion or after establishing military control. The Japanese army commanders, who were convinced of Japanese moral and spiritual superiority, dictated the policies. This consisted mainly propaganda gained from experiences in Korea and Taiwan. A part of this propaganda campaign was actually sending men of culture, bunkajin. About 3,000 bunkajin were sent to East and Southeast Asia, to try to introduce Japanese culture. However, these efforts were very ineffective, I would say, because most of these bunkajin had very little knowledge of the local language, so they couldn't really actually disseminate or introduce Japanese culture effectively. Of course, an integral part of Japan's cultural policy included the usage of propaganda against foreign influences. For example, in Malaysia, Singapore, and the Philippines, English newspapers and movies were banned, and anti-American campaigns voiced from Japanese-controlled radio. One of the interesting campaigns I came across during my research was a campaign in Southeast Asia against Coca-Cola, because Coca-Cola was seen as a very strong sign of Americanization, right? So the campaign told the local people in Southeast Asia, you should not drink Coca-Cola, because Coca-Cola includes a drug that if you drink Coca-Cola, this drug makes you drink it again and again and again. And actually, if you think about it, it's not propaganda, it's the truth, right? Yeah, it's a conspiracy, right? So, to conclude this first, because I don't have so much time to talk about it, the results of Japan's cultural policies in East Asia during the years of war of occupation were actually mixed. On the one hand, Japanese concepts about culture and life were introduced throughout the empire, especially in Korea and Taiwan, where cultural policies were implemented more strongly. The widespread usage of Japanese language in Korea and Taiwan is perhaps the most successful indication. If you go to Korea, the older people, they can speak Japanese. This is actually a sign. If it's good or bad is another question, but it's a sign of success. Wartime Japanese propaganda also helped mobilize Japanese society to establish an empire in Asia, and this propaganda lived on even after Japan's defeat. So no doubt, in the short term, cultural policy did help Japan gain better control of its colonies and to integrate them into the expanding empire. On the other hand, however, Japanese-controlled areas in China and Southeast Asia were simply too big to make Japan's cultural policy effective. Only a small segment of the population actually met these men of culture, bunkajin, who were sent from Japan. From the very start, it was rather hard power that most strongly held Japanese empire together. Another important point to emphasize is that in the eyes of Japan's top policymakers, especially its military leadership, Japan's cultural policy was basically an instrument of control. Indeed, as I mentioned, some Japanese individuals really believe they have some kind of cultural, important ideological mission in East and Southeast Asia. But it wasn't seen like this, but many of the top leadership. For them, culture was seen as yet another way to strengthen Japan's control of this area. Now, these are a few posters. Well, I didn't have time so much to talk about it. This is a few campaign and propaganda posters from this time. Japanese propaganda poster from the 30s. I looked at, in my research, at a few posters and, of course, some thoughts. Japanese propaganda in Korea. Okay, this is an interesting example. Do you know that actually Japanese government sent people from Yoshimoto Kogyo to try to Taiwan and later on to China to make performance in front of the people with the intention of actually, introducing Japanese culture. So these comedians, right, they went to these countries and tried to make people laugh, right? But they have difficult because they couldn't speak the language, right? So actually you can see the intention, the part of the intention of spreading some kind of Japanese word in a very comprehensive sense, but it wasn't really effective. Now, after the war, the defeat in the war and the legacy of American occupation, of course, broke the course of Japan's cultural policy and effectively neutralized the government's will to actively promote Japanese culture in Asia. The promotion of Japanese culture in Asia was not regarded as the right way to advance Japan's new interests in the region. Culture was rather seen as a risk that might hamper Japan's quiet return to the region to do business. Therefore, the government interest in promoting Japanese culture in East Asia was almost non-existent during most of the post-war period. Even the term cultural policy, bunka seisaku, or bunka seisaku, this word was only heard in 1993 in a paper by Bunkacho. But interestingly, domestically, the Japanese government was given a role in the country's cultural life from the very beginning. The Constitution of Japan, that came into force in May 1947, dictated in Article 25 that all people are entitled to enjoy a minimum level of healthy and culturally rich life. So actually the promotion of the nation's cultural life is the responsibility of the government in this sense. And indeed, when culture policy was set, it was rather inward-looking. There were only a few initiatives to introduce Japanese culture overseas, especially to North America and Europe. In 1968, it was also in charge of some kind of international exchange. In the diplomatic front, only in the late 70s, Japanese diplomacy perpetuated the rhetoric of cultural exchange and cultural cooperation as a way to improve relations with Asian countries. Not with Northeast Asia, where historical issues were still kept high, but with Southeast Asia, where improved relations have already been established. Prime Minister Fukuda was the first to raise the issue of culture in regards to Asia. In his 1977 doctrine, he stated that Japan wishes to promote cultural exchange, bunka kyōryoku, with Southeast Asia as a part of a wider dialogue. A decade later, Prime Minister Takeshita continued the same line of diplomacy. He was the first, actually, to initiate a concrete plan to promote Japanese culture in the region by appointing a committee in 1988. Since the 70s, Japan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, through the Japan Foundation, was also been carefully paving new paths for promoting Japanese culture overseas. Since its establishment in 1972, the Japan Foundation has been primarily engaged in promoting Japanese culture. But if you look at, especially in the 70s and 80s, the focus was mainly in North America. Today, the Japan Foundation operates on a global scale, yet the United States sometimes remains a major area of focus and budget. I don't have so much time, so I will go straight to the conclusion of this part. To conclude the post-war period, the Japanese government exercised extreme caution in promoting its culture in Asia, especially in the first 3 decades after the war. Given the traumatic experience of colonization and war, the legitimacy to use culture as a political tool was still very weak. The Japanese government's culture policy, de jure, concentrated on preservation of cultural heritage and traditional artistry. Contemporary artistic and cultural creativity, commodification, marketing, and export were left entirely in the hands of the private sector. Now, during the economic miracle years from the 60s to the late 80s, Japan was preoccupied with getting its factories running and its economy working. For this purpose, it needed to rely on the importation of raw materials from East and Southeast Asian countries and on the local workforce in Japanese factories in this region. The introduction of Japanese culture to Asia was considered potential stimulation to anti-Japanese sentiments and could have endangered the important business relations Japan wanted to continue with this region. This attitude, however, as we shall see next, dramatically changed in the 90s. And maybe just to give one example, in April 2005, the Japanese government launched a new vision called Japan's 21st Century Vision, declared that by 2020, Japan would become a culturally creative nation. According to this vision, Japan needs to invest more in utilizing its traditions, creative power, and technology, and increase the free exchange of culture in order to enhance a new global position. Meaning this is only one of several or many, I would say, initiatives to try to brand or rebrand Japan as a creative or culturally creative power. The above example exemplifies the changing attitude in Japan towards the usage of culture for economic and diplomatic purposes. This is also indicative of the Japanese government's attempt to embrace the newly emerging image of Japan as a cool country for envisioning a new post-crisis future for Japan. This time, however, the government is not leading the promotion of Japanese culture abroad, but its actions are rather responsive, following and accommodating the success of the private sector in producing and exporting commodified culture. This is a major difference. Here, the Japanese is not leading. It's actually following the success of the private sector. Nevertheless, the government has de facto become involved in the efforts to promote Japanese culture abroad and is constantly seeking new areas for state intervention in the newly promising cultural industrial sector. Since we don't have time to go over all the initiatives, and this is a kind of list of government here, each government ministry is trying to emphasize some part. For example, METI, the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, emphasized the economic portfolio of Japan's cultural export, while the Japan Foundation or the Ministry of Foreign Affairs emphasize more the diplomatic achievements. At present, there are no less, according to my count, there are no less than 13 governmental ministries and agencies involved in one way or another in promoting Japan's cultural industries for export. In 2002, the government launched the Strategic Council on Intellectual Property within the Prime Minister office. Well, and there are so many initiatives that I don't have so much time to go over them. I would just emphasize that, for example, the initiatives of METI, Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, emphasize investing in infrastructure. What does it mean, infrastructure for the culture industries? It means better communication. It means better school. It means better school to train professionals for the culture industries. It means better emphasizing intellectual property rights. So each ministry is actually trying to take part in this growing and promising sector. But again, it's following the success of the private sector. Okay. Well, the diplomatic advantages of pop culture were personally acknowledged by recent Japanese Prime Minister. In this sense, talking about pop culture became politically cool, I would say. Of course, one of the major supporters of manga diplomacy was previous Prime Minister Aso Taro, but also other prime ministers, of course, had some kind of interest in this. Aso Taro, reportedly a fan of manga, he said in some interviews, actually, a country that doesn't use the manga, doesn't use its cultural power, this is a quite stupid thing to do. You should use it. This is one of Japan's resources, and we should use it more actively. No? Actually, the same, and of course, this is an interesting picture where Doraemon on his inauguration ceremony with the foreign minister of Japan. Dragon was appointed as a kind of cultural ambassador. This is another Japan's cultural ambassador. This time, the infamous Kitty-chan, right? No, everyone knows Kitty-chan. And here is actually a Minister of Land, Infrastructure and Transport and Tourism in May 2008. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs, this is especially one initiative that my students like. They appointed 3 cultural ambassadors. I'm sure Hara-san knows very well about this initiative, no? Okay, and this is actually a Kawaii ambassadors appointed in March 2009, and actually they are sent by Japan's foreign ministry to different, fan gatherings around the world to talk with people who are interested in Japan. Maybe the next symposium we should invite them here. I'm sure the room will be of course full with fans, much more with scholars. Yes, yes, of course. Maybe we should invite or talk it through an institute. Well, just another point is that. Well, I don't have much time to talk about it, but if you look at the public discourse, I would say both intellectual and popular discourse in Japan regarding the export of popular culture, it is generally positive. Of course, you have some intellectuals saying, no, this is not nice, what is popular culture? It's nothing, it's not interesting, it's not serious. But this is, I would say, a very small minority. Overall, I would say both popular and intellectual discourse supports it. First, if you look, for example, at the right side of the map, so exporting Japanese popular culture, exporting Japanese culture is a sign of, that Japan is doing well, right? That Japan is actually exporting its culture. It's a sign of pride. For the left, it is also a very positive thing because Japan here exports popular culture. It shows it's nicer. Popular, right? Nicer and friendlier sides. It's much better than exporting weapons, for example, right? So actually, and intellectuals, economists, for example, say, yes, this is a good way to upgrade the economy, right? And of course, people who support manga or public diplomacy, they say, of course, this is very nice. Actually, it promotes, it creates interest. People in academia, like me, saying, this is very nice. Because it creates interest in Japanese studies. It brings more students into class. It promotes Japanese language teaching. So basically, I would say the discourse in Japan is very much supportive of Japan's popular culture export. Yeah, I don't have so much time. I'll just finish in one last point, is that looking. If I conclude everything, looking at the fluctuations in Japan's culture policy over these 3 periods that I mentioned allow us to understand how Japan has used its culture policy to further its geopolitical goals, and more basically, how it has viewed the role of culture in the context of its relations with Asian neighbors. In a broader sense, the Japanese experience shows that culture policy, even when inward-looking, is not isolated from a country's geopolitical position and its ambitions in the world, regardless of the political system under which it operates. And if there will be other questions, I'll be happy to thank. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Nissim. In Israel, we export culture and weapons. We support both right-wing and left-wing and support the economy. Okay, our last speaker, let's start with the important thing. He was 20% Israeli. He was a graduate student of the Rotberg International School, 1995 to 1996. That means you're an Israeli. I hope you like the food. And a visiting research of the Truman Institute, 2009. He had a lot of fun. He came back. Well, so let's start the official way. Professor Hamanaka Shingo is Associate Professor of Political Science at Yamagata University from 2005. He received his PhD in 2000 at Kobe University. The doctoral dissertation was published as The Political Culture of the Palestinians. His research field are quantitative methods for comparing politics and international relations in the Middle East. Let's hope he can understand Middle East more than us, because we don't. He will talk about the Israeli-Arab conflict from a systems approach, a Japanese perspective of international studies. Good luck. May the force be with you. 20 minutes. I'll give you an extra 2 minutes. Who's an Israeli?
Shalom Kram. And I'm Shingo Hamanaka from Yamagata University. Would like to thank the Truman Institute for inviting me to appear before you today, especially Dr. Nissim Otmazgin, head of Asia unit for arranging this unique conference with my supervisor in the academic year 1995-1996, Professor Ehud Harari. And thank you, Dr. Aaron Levkowitz, for your kind introduction. It's a great honor to participate in the international conference, Japan to Israel. I'm extremely optimistic that we are upon an exciting new threshold in this field. One full of challenge and possibility. I think this is particularly true regarding the Israeli-Arab conflict on international studies. This is here that I would like to focus a systems approach. And the purpose of this work to redesign the concept of international systems to be useful tool for every student interested in the Israeli-Arab conflict. Our method makes the concept more explicit, more intuitive, and less arbitrarity. In this study, we focus on people's awareness of international politics in the region, since it seems that our political situation have created public attitudes. This is my take-home message from me. So, introduction. Let me answer the introduction. International system is a popular concept to describe a rough picture of international relations. In a systems approach for international politics, much attention has been paid to the system's structure. Most of those researching war and peace have recognized that the structure of the system somewhat determines conflict escalation and stability in the region. The structure are defined by the principle of anarchy and the number of strong powers. International systems are stable if they have the flexibility to absorb crises among the states. We are used to thinking about foreign affairs by using the systems approach as a starting point. It's common not only in the discussion in international relations, IR studies or classroom, but in speech of politicians. Deputy Minister, Prime Minister Dan Meldor mentioned in last year. He said Middle East has an axis that wants stability and a more radical axis. That is seeking change through violent or diplomatic means. Former Foreign Minister M.K. Tzipi Livni, who also gave a speech after Meldor, highlighting a division in the region between militant Islamic radicals and the pragmatic moderates. The radical bloc includes Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas. The moderates include Israel, Egypt, Jordan, and the free world led by the United States. And despite the widespread use of a systems approach, it contains some problems. The main problem is that there is no consensus among IR analysts about relationship between the distribution of capabilities and order in the system. Some experts believe a system of two superpowers makes peace and stability possible, while others contend that a large number of significant states would purely prevent major war. Otherwise, the existence of a hegemon is deemed to maintain order in the anarchic world. Joseph Nye and David Welch's Understanding Global Conflict and Cooperation, it's a standard IR textbook, argues the multipolar system could not control likelihood of war, but most war fought in the multipolar system context were short and geographically limited. Bipolar structure can control the outbreak of war, but the wars that have been fought in a bipolar system context have been long and disastrous. What is the contemporary structure of the systems around Israel in the Middle East? According to Meridor and Livni, it seems to be a bipolar system in which a moderate bloc faced anti-Israel radicals. If Nye and Welch are correct, the bipolar structure might be able to prevent an eruption. If a country releases itself from the restriction of the system and launch a war, hostility will spread through the system and involve many people. However, the literature of systems approach to Middle East politics regards the region as a multipolar subsystem under the influence of the post-Cold War system of US hegemony. If the true system of the region is a multipolar structure, the system would permit sporadic and a small conflict with flexibility. Then we consider how do Israel think about the Middle East system. The National Poll Survey in the Middle East, Israel, 2011, was conducted in the fall of last year. Among the representative sample of Israeli residents include Arab with Israeli citizenship. Our questionnaire asked the following. For each of the following countries, please specify to what extent the way the country tackling the political issues contribute to the establishing political stability in the Middle East. 5 points were very much, quite much, moderately, and not very much, and not at all. This is an ordinal scale. I recorded the response in the reverse order, and thus a better evaluated country gets a higher value. Figure 1 shows the mean of 15 countries' evaluation of the stabilization in the region. Upper side is positive, underside is negative. Israelis think that the United States and the State of Israel are tackling the political issue in a way that contributes to political stability in the Middle East. Israel ranks the second highest evaluation, averaging 4.05 on a 5-point scale. This result is unexpected, since in the previous Arab poll, especially Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq, citizens usually regarded their home country as the highest contributor to regional stability. And the result gives an impression the state of Israel is dependent on the United States in the Middle East politics. Given that a score of 3 means moderately, only 5 countries, the United States, Israel, France, and the United Kingdom and Egypt have a positive evaluation, receiving an average more than 3 points. Here. Israeli citizens are concerned with Lebanon, Syria, Iran, and the Palestinians as threat to regional stability. Japan takes a position behind the four destabilizing actors with an average 2.52. The assessment of Japan contains the largest number of missing values. 144 people do not reply to the question among the total 801 samples, which means that Japan has almost no impact on the politics in the area. To create the political mental map, we performed a factor analysis run on the 15 countries' evaluation items. It gives two distinct dimensions loaded in a pattern matrix. One of them appears to be the degree to which countries have revisionist policy to change regional order in the Middle East. The factor represent revisionism in the political process. The other concerns the direction of a U.S. policy in the Middle East, because the score of the United States is the highest, and higher scores are generally given the government cooperating with the United States. Figure 2 here shows the political mental map of Israeli citizens consisting of the dimension of the revisionist process and direction of U.S. policy in the area. Furthermore, we use the cluster analysis to classify the 15 countries into 5 groups. Additionally, 4 of them are categorized into 2 larger groups. Israel occupies a position in the ellipse containing outside powers: the United States, the United Kingdom, and France. This group is close to the containing Jordan and Egypt. Both countries seem to follow U.S. policy in the Middle East. It's okay. Both Jordan and Egypt, perhaps because of the peace treaty with Israel, were inside the larger ellipse in the upper right-hand corner of the map, which can be called pro-American peace camp. By contrast, Iran, Syria, Lebanon, Turkey, and the Palestinians form a cluster in lower left-hand corner, which can be called the anti-Israel, anti-American radical camp of enemy states. It should be noted that in eyes of the Israeli citizens, Japan seems to be a conservative stance and to remain independent from the United States' own Middle East policy. Though Japanese diplomacy has supported the status quo in the region, Japan has its own national interest and does not follow American diplomacy. Japanese Middle East policy looks unique because Japan has not stopped importing oil from Iran, does not necessarily support Israel. Due to the evaluation containing in the largest number of missing value, some Israelis may have no image of Japan as tackling the political issue contributing to the regional stability. We should consider whether the Middle East is a bipolar system or instead have a multipolarity. Israel politicians described it as a bipolar structure. Benjamin Miller, an Israeli political scientist, argued that the multipolar structure of the Middle East is composed of Egypt, Iran, Turkey, pre-2003 Iraq, Israel, post-1970 is Syria and Saudi Arabia. Political mental map show that the regional system has not only the bipolar structure consisting of a peace camp and the radical camp, but also a multipolar character, with Jordan and Egypt adopting moderate foreign policies and Saudi Arabia in a unique conservative stance. During the Cold War, the Israeli-Arab conflict was a result of bipolar system. Consisting Israel and nationalist anti-Zionist Arab countries with no regular pattern of interaction. After the Camp David Agreement, a system took on the multipolar structure. The system changed to obtain a flexible structure to permit small conflict and the ability to control an escalation of fighting through diplomatic ties. This figure, this political mental map shows that Israelis do not seem to believe in the self-help principle, since they put the state of Israel in the position in the peace camp of the free world. In the case of Arab countries, the assessment of Egypt is higher than that of Jordan in the figure 1. The distance from Israel, however, means that Egypt retains a strong power, but is not a state with close partnership with Israel. Because of the 2011 Egyptian revolution, former President Hosni Mubarak avoided the take anti-Israeli policy, but lost his political power. The next government will adopt a new foreign policy after the president is democratically elected. The political mental map suggests that Turkey is involved in the anti-Israeli and anti-American group composed of Lebanon, Syria, Iran, and the Palestinians. Palestinians. Turkish-Israeli relations deteriorated after Operation Castlet, and the Gaza flotilla raid, an Israeli operation against 6 ships with the Turkish and Muslim volunteers in the international water, strained the relation further. The radical camp is an isolated group and holds only minor power in the political mental map. From the perspective of the system's approach, it makes sense for the Islamic Republic of Iran to increase its power and resist the threat from Israel. Therefore, Iran has a strong incentive to develop a nuclear device and is forced to do under current circumstances. Its ally Syria has been left weak from the domestic unrest it has experienced over the last year. The Iranian nuclear strategy is only a balancing act, but it has worried Israeli leaders and prompt argument over airstrike on the nuclear facility after publication of IAEA report on Iran in November 2011. In bipolarity, the interaction between the moderate and the radical camp loses flexibility to maintain order in the region. Israel has no free hand to launch a preemptive strike unilaterally due to the constraint of global system, the US hegemonic system. From the standpoint of the system's approach or a Japanese perspective, a systemic constraint has forced the government of Israel to rethink its plan to attack Iran. Okay. The map is a comprehensive overview describing the public attitude on how countries in the Middle East, West, and the East contribute to stability in the region. It's shown as a scatter plot created from the statistics of poll survey data. We explored what an Israeli picture is of the Middle East or balance of power in the region. This study tried to obtain the picture by using political mental map, not just schematic diagram. That is. Thank you for your attention, and we would be happy to entertain any comments. Thank you.
Good luck. Thanks. In the Israeli politics, you gain stability by having about 50 ministers and 94 MPs. That means we'll win a Nobel Prize for ingenuity. Okay, we got about, yeah. I'm first. We got about 20 minutes. Can we move the camera, or they have to go? Okay. We don't have to move the camera, so you can speak. Do you hear? Okay. So introduce yourself, ask the question. We'll start one by one. Ladies first. Okay. Yeah. Rachel.
Thank you.
Can you speak louder? So.
Professional at the university. Thank you very much for your presentations. I would like to deliver maybe two questions to you, Hamanaka side. And I'm very interested as well as you by the Japanese perspective of the Israeli-Arab conflict. And first, maybe two short questions. You mentioned the political mental map, and I wonder what are the criteria that you use to design this theory, and what are the meaning, the significance of the numbers on the axis, which is not clear to me. The revisionism and the US policies in the area, and how you get this theory. And if you can elaborate later, these two short questions about the Japanese mental map, because we were talking about the Israeli political mental map, and I was wondering about the Japanese.
Alex?
Yes, thank you, Alexander Buch, University of Tsukuba. I have just one short and insignificant correction for Nissim's presentation and a question to Hoshiro-san. It was not Takeshita Noboru, it was Ohira in '79 who introduced the Age of Culture. But yes, but the report was published in 1980 after he died during Takeshita Noboru's premiership. But the whole idea of the Age of Culture, the introduction of the Age of Culture and of culture to Japanese politics was done by Ohira, who established a number of groups. Among them, one was the group on the Age of Culture. But I mean, he died shortly afterwards, so most of the reports were published after his death. But my question is to Hoshiro-san. I was really interested in what you said, that the ODA, the reparations, they paved the way for Japanese economic advancement. And I was wondering if you could elaborate a bit on the mechanisms that enabled it. I remember reading quite a lot of papers on Japanese ODA, especially in the context of China, for example, the conditions that, in the projects like road building projects, Japanese firms will be involved. So in this kind of situation, it's kind of obvious how this paves the way for Japanese economic advancement into these countries. But I was wondering, what were the mechanisms involved in the war reparations that enabled this, the economic advancement of Japanese firms into Southeast Asian region. Thank you.
Any more question?
I have a question, but later on.
Okay, one and one me. Yeah.
The question to...
can you introduce yourself?
Jonas Sidera, Hebrew University of Jerusalem and Ben-Gurion University. A question to Dr. Nissim Otmazgin. Is the penetration of the popular culture to East Asian countries, or Asian countries, how does it affect the political approach of the people towards Japan?
The people,
in that country,
in the
receiving country.
Let me add, does it influence the government? Yeah.
Ilan, Hebrew University. Thank you for your presentation. I have a question as well to Dr. Nissim Otmazgin. I know it's a subject for different lecture, but can you please compare between Japanese and Korean cultural policies and explain the similarity and difference? Because your lecture seems very similar. So I'd like to know.
Okay. We'll have a seminar on this topic. Okay. So two quick questions. One for Professor Harari. Do you think that Japan can play a great role in the peace process in the Middle East? And the more important question, will the US, Europe, or the Israelis, Middle East countries will allow it to do so? Okay, later on I'll ask the other questions. Who wants to start? Harari? The same.
In order of the questions.
Okay, no. Who was first? Yours first. You're the Israeli one, so you do first.
Thank you for questions. This one. So it is not unclear. It is not unclear for you the axis. The x-axis means revisionism. I named these labels to look at the order of the countries. And so the revisionism, these countries, we called it as a radical camp because so these countries want to change the order in the Middle East, but these countries behaved conservatively to keep status quo and so moderate with moderate process. So I called x-axis as revisionism, and y axis I called the U.S. policy in the area and similarity with the U.S. Because top score, United States get the top score and followers. These countries follows and imitate the U.S. Middle East policy. But these countries behaved independently from the U.S. So I called this axis as U.S. policies in the area. And second question, so what do you mean? So Japanese how to create a Japanese mental map in the Asia region, right?
Middle East.
In Middle East. So what is mean? Before writing the mental map, so we try to conduct a poll in the Japan, right? No. Okay. So this my front of view. Japan is not want to change the order in the Japan in Middle East, but Japan is independent from the position of the United States. So in Japan, in the Middle East, Japanese diplomacy try to get its own national interest. It's not far from the United States. I think so. So, and if possibly, so Israelis have not a concrete image about the Japanese diplomacy in the Middle East. The China is same. So this position told me such a thing. It's my interpretation. Okay.
Thanks, Nissim. Yeah. Let's have 3 minutes to everyone.
Okay, sure. I'll be fast. For Alex, thanks for the comments. Actually, usually when we're talking about the beginning of cultural aspects in diplomatic relations between Japan and Southeast Asia, well, most of the researchers point to the Fukuda's doctrine. Of course, there are other initiatives in between. Just marking the major points. So, of course, you mentioned Ohira. He had some initiatives. For me, in my research, actually, I found that the first concrete initiatives, which goes beyond discourse, was only in 1988 by Takeshita, who established a committee to export Japanese television dramas and animation to Southeast Asian countries. Okay, so and this committee actually really put on a program, a concrete program to do it. The prime minister before this, including Fukuda, they were mainly involved with discourse. You can also mention other prime ministers, right? For example, Nakasone, who talked about Kokusaika, right? The internationalization of Japan, which, well, basically what came out of this program is try to increase the Japanese language studies program across the world. Of course, if you take a look at the list, actually, there are many discourses that just trying to point to the major milestones in these relations as I see them, at least. For Yona, how does the export of Japanese popular culture affect the local governments in East and Southeast Asia? Well, looking at it after the war, you can, I think, actually we can trace a few patterns. At a certain period of time, there was a lot of censorship on Japanese popular culture, because sometimes it was conceived as violent, you know, anime like has some kind of violent nature. Just one interesting example is in the Philippines. In the Philippines, there was some kind of anime, Japanese anime called Voltage 5, where young people are fighting against monsters. So the Marcos regime censored this animation because it said it is too violent. But actually, the Marcos regime thought there was some kind of political meaning in this, that people are trying to struggle for their freedom. So actually, this was the reason. So in some cases, some governments in Southeast Asia censored, just prohibited the distribution of popular culture. It's still going on in China. In Korea, until 1998, selling of Japanese culture was censored, was prohibited. Because of the past, right? Because of the historical recollections. In Taiwan, between 1972 and 1992, the marketing of Japanese culture was also prohibited. In the case of Taiwan, it's interesting. They said it's because of the history, but basically, Taiwan censored the importation of Japanese culture after Japan's recognized the People's Republic of China instead of Taiwan. But then in 1992, it reopened again the market. Still in Korea, there are some censorships. Some other governments, like in Malaysia and in Singapore, they actually liked the idea of importing Japanese popular culture because it was seen as a counterbalance American influence, so actually to counterbalance Americanization. The patterns these days, as I see them, is actually the Japan here is seen again as a sort of model. In the economic sense. And I think that South Korea is the best example. The export of Japanese popular culture and the success of the cultural industries are seen as a possible model to emulate. So you see initiatives going on in Korea to try to help the export of culture. You see in Thailand. In Thailand, a small country, they sent a delegate of animators to Japan to study how to make animation with the intention of establishing an animation industry in Thailand, not only for the domestic market, but also for export. You can mention Hong Kong and you can mention China these days. Actually, China is these days, the culture industries are going through vast changes where they try to understand the economic benefits of culture, not only the political of it. And which brings me to the question of Korea. And I remember that 2 weeks ago you visited my office, and you remember what I gave you back then in the office? I gave you, okay. I gave you a paper of mine which was published last year, and it's called "A Tale That Wags the Dog?" ? Cultural Industry and Cultural Policy in Japan and South Korea. So yeah, I should have brought the reprints, but I have a whole paper comparing exactly cultural policy in Japan and South Korea, which I can bring in the break and give to the people who are interested. But just not to keep you excited, I'll just say the major point of difference. As I see it, in South Korea, the government policy towards culture is very much strategic, much organized, I would say, than the Japanese case. For example, they established two semi-governmental organizations. One is called COFACE and the other one is COCA. And those, the role of this organization is actually to mediate between the government and the market. The people who work in these agencies are not people from the government, but they recruited people from the private sector. And their role is actually to mediate between policy and the private sector itself. Another major difference, I would say, that Korean culture industries are much more export-oriented. And this is because of the size of the market. The size of the Japanese market is 3 times bigger than the Korean market. The majority of Japanese see themselves as middle class, is a kind of affluent market. So actually, the Japanese domestic market keeps Japanese culture industries inward looking. While in the Korean sense, if the Korean culture industries really want to be big, they have to go abroad. The domestic market is not enough. And the final thing, it's especially my feeling is that the Korean culture industries are more willing to go abroad, more willing to compete. When I interviewed people in East and Southeast Asia, they said it's much more easier to deal with the Koreans in terms of intellectual property right, in terms of making business. Well, and this is not surprising because you know, competing with Japan is one of the strongest engines that keep Korean working hard. So this is also a case where you can find some interesting comparison. Thank you.
I have another question. I was just thinking
okay. Thank you.
Later on. I'm Ayelet Zohar. I'm from the Hebrew University and Haifa University. And I was looking into the question of the downside of dissemination of popular culture. At the end of the day, you know, the image of Japan among a lot of people, either in Asia or in America or Europe, turns out to be, you know, a nation of Doraemons and Kitty-chans. And then when Hamanaka-san is coming with a question about the political policy of Japan, people say in Israel have not a clue that Japan may have some sort of political policy towards the Mideast. So isn't there a sort of a risk in clinging too deeply into dissemination of popular culture, ending up with an image of, you know, a country of Doraemons without further depth or complexity of the actual culture in Japan?
Well, it's a great question. 2 things I can say. I'm not sure I can answer this one. The first thing is, first we have to remember there is a very interesting connection between popular or low culture and high culture, right? If you look at Kabuki, right? Kabuki represents traditional Japan, represent Japanese aesthetic, Japanese deep culture. But let's remember how Kabuki started. It started with a group of girls performing under a bridge in Kyoto, and then it advanced to performances where people, women, at the beginning, you know very well, right? They performed in front of the crowd, and then after the performance, they used to sell their body to the crowd, right? What's more popular than that, right? But now it's considered to be, it has advanced since, it's considered to be high culture. Shakespeare's plays as well, right? They started as plays. I would say that even in the field of manga, and you know very well about it, right? You have some animation, which is now considered to be really classics, right? Or high aesthetical value. So maybe in another 20 years, you know, there will be like it will be different. This is the first thing I can say. The second thing is that we have to be careful to try to understand or comprehend what are the real images that the reviewers, the receiver side, gets from it. Because as I see it, the popular culture images and contents seems to diversify through the process of consumption. So basically the images, what kind of images? They are inconsistent, they are implicit, they are subject to different interpretations. So in this sense, I'm not sure we always receive the audience. Some people maybe see it as a kind of the land of dragons, right? Some people actually, they see different things. So this is why it's much more easier, I think, to to investigate, for us researchers to look at the production and dissemination side than the reception side. The reception side is very difficult to read. Thank you.
מי אמר את זה? ניסים, יש מישהו מעלה?
Okay, just one minute. He used.
Now we find out.
Yeah, he uses time, and I will save time. Question about Professor Alexander about what was the mechanism that made Japan advance into economically into Asian market with war reparation, same as ODA and FDI, like building first building infrastructures such as dams, factories, roads by Japanese firms, because there's no equivalent firms in Asia at that time. So they need Japanese firms' help, and they need export capital goods or intermediate goods from Japanese firms, okay, exported by Japanese firms. It's kind of it's called tight end. You know, the tight end is considered as bad now, but at that time there's no such norms. So war reparation was kind of tight end. Yeah, that's deepened economic interdependence between Japan and Southeast Asian countries. Okay.
Ehud?
Well, maybe if I might add one word to Hoshiro's answer. The mechanism was actually to create a demand, further demand for Japanese goods and services and knowledge, because when Japan exported technology, right? Technology meaning that engineers learn to operate Japanese capital goods and things like that. So they got used to that kind of technology, and therefore, even when the reparation system ended, they still were used to using that, and it actually was very useful.
She doesn't allow us to continue. Why? She's the boss. Even Nissim can reject.
Time? Are we really limited in time? Okay.
Nissim.
Well, I don't have any time, I guess.
No.
It's over.
Nissim.
Okay, a few minutes.
A few minutes, okay.
You started late.
Okay.
Okay, just a quick question. So, I mean, to both. So basically, I don't know much about the reparations. So all the reparations, basically, they were like very similar to ODA, tied with, conditions. There was not actually money paid or transferred to the banks of national banks of the Asian countries. It was basically the same structure as the ODA.
Goods and technology.
Goods and technology.
Yeah, and money.
So there was also money transferred to the countries. Like actually, like, I don't know, Germany paid reparations, it actually transferred money to certain countries, certain individuals. Yeah. So in the case of Japan, was it more like, ODA countries?
Yeah.
Okay, just before we end our session, I'd like to remind...
I have a few things to say, if it's all right with you.
Yeah, okay. Sorry. No, you have to.
It's a very long order, the question put to me about what Japan can do. And you're the one who asked me, so with your permission, I say a few words. First of all, the question is Japan interested in playing a role in the Arab-Israeli conflict? And the answer is yes, as a matter of fact. And as strange as it may sound, one obstacle to Japan expanding its role in the Middle East has been the United States. Because when the quartet was established several years ago, actually Japan wanted to expand it and to turn it into a quintet, because Japan felt that it really needs to have a place at the table because she has something to offer to the table. And Japan has been actually active in helping Israel and the Palestinians and other countries in various ways. And I'll just mention some of them that have been already done. The sort of most famous one is the Corridor of Peace in Jericho. You must have heard about that. Well, it hasn't actually done much, but the preparations are on, and the prospects are at least good if you want to be optimistic about that. The people-to-people kind of diplomacy that has been actually promoted by Japan. And this is related and not related also to track 2 kinds of meetings that actually were very interesting and played some role in East Asia, right? And they are contributing something to the peace process. It's not everything, but it's something. It really sets the grounds for the time when the political situation would improve, and then they would come into play. Now, what could Japan do in the future? Well, first of all, to increase the people-to-people element of its diplomacy. For example, academics from Arab countries, especially Egypt, are not willing to come to conferences in Israel. And so maybe the Japan Foundation could try to convince them, exerting some pressure, to make sure that the conferences that are dealing with the Middle East should actually include Israelis and Arabs. Another thing that might actually be useful, and I don't know exactly how to go about it, but at least generally speaking, is leading from behind in reverse. What I mean by that is that Japan could be the sort of front stage for Israel in trying to help other countries become more liberal, more democratic, and in view of the fact that Japan has very good relations with Arab countries, they could sort of gradually and sensitively, right, point out that Israel might not be that bad, and relations with Israel should be actually beneficial to both sides. So it's a very
optimistic
of looking at it. Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Well, just to I pray to God. I don't know. Choose the God you want that it will work out. But the Middle East, as we see, doesn't work according to plans. First of all, to remind everyone that the Israeli Association of Japanese Studies has been established. If you want, you have to register and you have to pay. And even Japanese can pay. We accept cash. But anyway, I think the participant of this panel, it's been very interesting, and I hope for a continuing conference. Toda, thanks. Sure.
Thank you.